The outcome is death. You have to keep functioning. That's why you have to adapt. You adapt to the world that you live in, not for the world that you wish you lived in. And that's what a lot of them miss. We don't live in a utopia. We don't live in an ideal world. You have to adapt to your reality, not the reality of your parents, not the reality of your friends, not the reality of your therapist. Therapy can only be effective as long as you believe what your therapist tells you. Because hear this out. Your therapist doesn't know you. They don't know how you act in your day-to-day life. They don't know how you treat people. They don't know how you carry yourself. They don't know what your posture is like, what your tone of voice is like. They don't know the kinds of dreams that you are having every night. They don't know the way people have treated you in the past. They don't know how people are treating you now. And they don't know the patterns of behavior that you have been subjected to. That's why their advice, what they say to you, offers a very limited insight into your life. Therapists have no choice but to take your words at face value. But the mistake they make in taking your words at face value is that the way you describe yourself may not accurately reflect the way that you are. And if they take it at face value, then they are casting a judgment on an inaccurate version of yourself. I think especially if you've had a rather unlucky life, if you've been hurt numerous times, you've been hurt so many times over and over, but you just sit there and you're just like, okay, I expected this. I saw it coming sooner or later. You have these moments where you're just like, yep, this is my luck. This is my fate. It always happens to me. And if you tell your therapist that, they will assume that you are the only common denominator. That's why the problem is you. Because all these things happen to you. And all these things didn't happen to your therapist. They likely lived a rather comfortable life. Their parents got along. They were fed. They were clothed as children. They never experienced complex trauma. They were never put in situations where they don't know what to do, They look up at the sky and they wonder, did a god put me in this situation? Like, what is going on? Is this a stunt? They were never put in a position where they question the absurdity of life. And that's why when you come and sit in their office, you tell them, I've been so unlucky. I've been hurt repeatedly by those that were the closest to me. They don't sympathize with you. They don't hear that you have been hurt. They do not see a wounded person that needs to be listened to and held. No, they see a common denominator. Well, if all these things happen to you, you're the only common denominator. It means that something is wrong with you. And it may be unconscious. Maybe you have an unconscious way of bringing this upon yourself. Maybe you seek out emotionally avoidant people, and that's why they keep treating you badly. But then you tell them, actually, no. If people upset me, I leave. I cut them off. I set boundaries. If they disrespect my boundaries, they go. And then they ask you, oh, maybe you cut people off too quickly. Whatever you say to some of these therapists, you cannot win. You just cannot win. So, first, you attract abusers, and then you cut them off too quickly. It's no matter what you tell the therapist, they will keep searching for a fault in you. Because they already made up their mind. They already have their model of your psyche, with you as the common denominator. That's why, if a therapist hasn't endured complex trauma throughout their life, if they lived a relatively sheltered, healthy, happy, composed life, they will not be able to identify what you are saying to them, because what you are saying to them sounds absurd. They think like this, oh, this person is telling me all these things and, they sound so unlucky. How is it possible? How is it possible that this person has been hurt again and again and again and again? There must be something wrong with them. They must be doing something, consciously or not, to bring this onto themselves. Or maybe they just like suffering. Maybe they don't know how to be happy. Because it's impossible for so many bad things to happen to one person. Well, actually, I'll tell you this. Statistically speaking, you can be unlucky. Statistically speaking, all of these bad things can happen to you. Just because. The universe doesn't have to give you an explanation. Bad things can happen to you just because. And that's it. No why, no explanation. Shit happens. That's it. You gotta move on. You gotta learn to live with this now. But to some therapists, to some psychologists, to some mental health practitioners, this is unfathomable. Because how can one person be so unlucky? And that's what they fail to grasp. Because people can, in fact, be very unlucky. People can, in fact, suffer from adversity after adversity, betrayal after betrayal. But because they lived sheltered lives, they cannot comprehend this. And they search for a fault in you. Because that fits their model. So then you enter this scenario where you're essentially forced to play cat and mouse with your therapist. Oh, maybe you attract abusers. Maybe some part of you attracts abusive and emotionally unavailable people. And you say, well, no, I cut them off. I don't let people abuse me repeatedly. And then they go, oh, maybe you just cut people off too quickly. And then you say, well, no, as a matter of fact, I have given them X amount of chances. And then they say, oh, maybe you misinterpreted something. You know, maybe your interpretation of abuse, betrayal, neglect, you name it, is inaccurate. You provide countless explanations because they position themselves as an authority figure when it comes to judging abuse, relational betrayal, and so on and so forth. They keep questioning you, they keep challenging you, and you keep coming up with answers. Because that's all they know how to do. They don't see you as someone who needs to be understood. They don't see a person who needs sympathy, who needs understanding, and who needs to be emotionally held. They see a person who miraculously keeps experiencing problems. And they need to fix that. They need to fix that because they don't know how to sit with someone who has suffered adversity countless times. It's incomprehensible to them. Because they never experienced it, and they don't know anyone who has. And it complements their schema. You're suffering because there is something inherently wrong with you. You bring this onto yourself, consciously or not. And we need to look at your patterns. You know, they would rather do everything, but admit that sometimes you can do everything right and still be hurt. Sometimes you can prepare yourself, you can be kind, you can let people walk all over you. But they can still abuse and betray you. Everything but to admit this. A lot of these therapists, they are actually extremely uncomfortable when asked to sit with the pain of their clients or patients. It's uncomfortable because they just feel the need to fix everything. Just to fix all your problems, fix all your pain. Because admitting that the world is prone to punishing people who come from disadvantaged backgrounds. Because let's face it, if you suffer adversity as a child, then chances are that you will also suffer adversity in your adolescence and into adulthood as well. It's like a domino effect, one bad thing after another. Because trauma, adversity, pain, suffering, it likes to accumulate. Oh, your parents hit you as a child. Okay. And then, as an adult, your partner hits you. They think that you are attracted to abusive people, to violent people. But they do not want to admit the fact that sometimes the most violent and abusive people pose as the healthiest, as the kindest and most caring. Because it's true. Listen, do you just expect abusers to announce themselves? Hello, I am an abuser. I'm going to hit you. As the relationship progresses. No, people like that, they are charming. Of course they're not going to tell you that they are going to abuse you. So you have to gaslight yourself when you go to therapy. You have to gaslight yourself because the therapist doesn't want to admit that abusive people can hide, that pain, suffering, trauma, it can present itself in broad daylight, in the middle of nowhere. It can happen to you just like this. You know, sometimes you cannot predict these things, and that's what a lot of these professionals don't want to admit. Abusers don't announce themselves. Trauma doesn't politely knock on the door. It just happens to you. It happens to you, and then you are left to pick up the shattered pieces of what was left of you. But no, the problem is you. The problem is you because you seek out abusive people. The problem is you because you bring this onto yourself. They don't want to admit that sometimes you can do everything right and still be hurt. That's why when you see a therapist and you tell them all of these things, oh, this happened to me, and then this happened to me, and then this person did this to me, and then they did that, this threatens their schema of the world. And that's why they want to search for a fault that lies in you. Everything but to compromise their schema of the world, society, and safety. Because they just don't want to believe that sometimes people are unlucky, even if they do everything right. And that's why therapy doesn't work for a lot of people. It worked for me for 7 years. But I think after you go through some experiences alone, you have to rebuild yourself from the ground up. You know, if no one is there to give you advice, if no one is there to comfort you when you go through the worst moments of your life entirely alone, you have to kill parts of yourself to ensure your subsequent survival. You have to compromise some of your pre-existing traits in order to continue to function in this world. Because if you stop functioning, then you die. If you stop going to work, you don't pay your rent, you cannot afford food. You know, the outcome is death. You have to keep functioning. That's why you have to adapt. You adapt to the world that you live in, not for the world that you wish you lived in. And that's what a lot of them miss. We don't live in a utopia. We don't live in an ideal world. You have to adapt to your reality, not the reality of your parents, not the reality of your friends, not the reality of your therapist. You have to adapt to your reality, because the alternative is to suffer. Is to suffer and hate yourself, hate your life, hate everything. And that's why you have to adapt. And they call this maladaptive. Because they don't like it. It displeases them. And that's why therapy doesn't work for a lot of people. Because when you see a therapist and you tell them, this is how I am, this is what I do, this is how I react in these situations, they don't like it because they expect you to be the bigger person all the time. Doesn't matter how people treat you. Doesn't matter that they hurt you, abuse you, humiliate you, degrade you. You must be the bigger person at all times. Because they think but you control everything. You know, if I act a certain way, if I manipulate these variables, then this will be the outcome. But you can do everything right and still be hurt. You can treat them nice and still be abused and betrayed. And that's what they don't tell you. They don't tell you that abuse isn't polite. They don't tell you that abusers hide in broad daylight. They don't tell you that trauma just announces itself. It doesn't ask politely. It just happens. And that's why you must adapt to your reality, not your therapist's or anybody else's.